Welcome to the Story a Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy, encouraging you to be a writer today, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to the 200th episode of the Story a Day podcast. I started putting this podcast out in 2016, and those of you who are math whizzes will notice that it took me a while to get to the 200th episode, given that I currently release one almost every week. Didn't start that way. What I want to do today is I want to talk you through some of the lessons I've learned in 4 years of this particular creative endeavour in order to share the lessons I've learned, which I think are really transferable to any creative endeavour, whether it's your short fiction, your long fiction, or some other art or craft that you pursue. So bear with me, although I'm talking about my experience with this podcast, I'm going to bring it back round to writing as much as I can. And I think you're going to see some definite parallels. So the very first thing that I want to say is keep going. Don't write one story. You don't have to write a story a day for the rest of your life, but you have to keep going. When I started this podcast, I thought I would do it as a little experiment. And there's various things I've done over the years as experiments that haven't stuck. But this one did because I enjoyed it. So that's part of the equation with any creative work. At some level, you have to enjoy it. It's not always what I want to do when I usually record this actually on a Saturday morning. It's not always what I want to do on a Saturday morning, but I really enjoy the work. And sitting down to wrestle with a tricky short story isn't always what you want to do. And sometimes when you're stuck in the middle or on a thorny bit, or you think the ending is rubbish, you're not having fun in the accepted version of, what movie fun looks like. But you're doing satisfying work that addresses your concerns and desires. It's using your talents. It's using your skills. So just keep going. If you keep writing for long enough, you can't help but improve. Unless you're doing it in a kind of slapdash, unreflective way. But I just don't think that you're going to be able to keep going if you're not reflecting on what you're doing. So keep going, because just the act of turning up and doing something over and over again means that you're going to get better at it. I say a lot less now than I used to in these podcasts, because I've been doing it for longer and I've reflected on it and I've realised how annoying that is, and I've worked to cut that out. With your own writing, you're going to find similar things. There's things that you do that people constantly give you feedback on, let's say, and you'll work to eliminate those. You'll work to heighten the stuff that people really like. If they think you're funny, you're going to try and be more funny in your stories. So just keep going. The other reason to keep going is that you become a known quantity. After a certain amount of time, anyone can start something, right? Anybody can start a podcast. Anybody can start writing a novel. Anybody can start writing stories, or start sending them out to magazines and publications. But if you persist, you become a known quantity, you become reliable, you become somebody that people know, like, and trust. And so even if we're talking about sending out stories, say you want to get into Uncanny Magazine, which is a science fiction and fantasy kind of dark magazine. If you really love that publication and you're determined to get a story in there, if you keep sending them things and you keep reading their magazine and you keep writing and adapting and taking any feedback you get from them, even if they never give you feedback, if they keep seeing you in their inbox, they start to know you. And once we get to know somebody, we sort of feel an affinity for them. We might even start to like them. And we might start to trust that, in this case, this is a writer who really wants to get into our magazine. And I think the editors are going to look more closely at stories that come in from someone whose name they know. I've heard them say this. They're going to look more closely at those stories. It's just human nature. They try and be fair. They try and be unbiased. But we want to work with our friends. We want to work with people we feel like are who understand us. So keep going. Keep writing stories, keep sending them out, become that reliable source of stories or whatever it is that you're turning out. The second thing I've learned is learn by doing. Don't wait until you know everything. This is very me. So I know this is more difficult for some people and less difficult for others. I'm quite comfortable leaping off the edge and seeing what happens. A lot of other people never get their good work out there because they are concerned about it being good enough or perfect. And you can dream about the perfect story forever, and you're never going to write it. You can wait for the perfect idea forever, but if you're not working on your skills in the meantime, when that perfect idea comes along, you're not going to be qualified to craft that idea into a story. When I started this podcast, I really wanted to do this. I'd been playing with podcasting technology for a number of years before that, but so let me rewind and say, learn by doing. Figure out the things that are stalling you. Once you've made the decision to leap, figure out the things that are slowing you down and eliminate them. So you can only progress if you're actually doing. So one of the things that was stalling me on a podcast is that I would record something and then I would make a mistake and I go back and correct it, and then I'd have to edit, and editing takes a long time. So you'll have noticed that most of these podcasts are kind of a free-form rant from me. I do plan, there is a structure nowadays, but when I was going back in and editing, it was just taking so long and I didn't have enough time to do it consistently that it wasn't happening. So I started using a service when I first started the podcast. There was this new service called Anchor. It's developed a lot since then. But at the time, it was pretty much just mash a button, stop talking, and then hit publish or don't. It was a live stream of consciousness recording that you posted and it went into their network and people could find it. And so it really killed the perfectionist in you. You had to just go for it. So the first few episodes I recorded that way, and then once I got comfortable with that, I started going back in and I started using different technology, and I put on a proper podcast host at the time. Anchor is a proper podcast host now, but so I really learned by doing, and the other thing I want to talk about there is lowering the bar. And you'll have heard me say this before. I'm like, try and write a terrible story today. During Story a Day challenges, I'll say, try and write a bad draft today. I don't advocate that every day, but occasionally you're like, I'm just going to write 100 words, or I'm going to write a Twitter story, or I'm going to try and write a ridiculous first draft made up of these words from your child's 3rd grade spelling list. Lower the bar, because if you get something done, you will find the nuggets in there and you will get the joy of creating something, and you will get that moment when you look back at it and you go, it was a ridiculous assignment and I actually kind of like that line, or I like the premise, or I like what I came up with, or I actually finished, and you'll get a win. And that is psychologically sound. Giving yourself tiny wins is a psychologically sound strategy. So lower the bar and learn by doing things. Another thing I've learned from doing the podcast is to make things public. Now, you'll know if you've been following me for any length of time that that's exactly why Story a Day exists. I wanted to write more, and so I challenged myself to write a story a day in May 2010, and I made it public because I knew that otherwise I would slink away from this challenge round about day 10, maybe day 14. I would get bored with it. I would start to rebel. It's a pattern. So I made it public, and I kind of hoped that nobody would notice, but I also told somebody that I knew lots of other writers, and she told lots of other writers, and that held me accountable. So making it public in a serious way, whatever you have to do, like I pretended I wasn't making it public, but then the honest part of me sent it to this person who has a huge following. So do whatever you have to do to hold yourself accountable. Making it public makes it more fun too. it also is, there's that accountability piece. With this podcast, it used to come out sort of randomly. I shot for every 2 weeks, but sometimes it wouldn't come out for a month or two. And then I got into the habit of posting every other week, and I was getting some feedback from listeners, and that was nice. And so I told a few of them, I made an announcement that I was going to go every week because I could see that people were waiting to get their little boost every Saturday morning. So I made the commitment to go weekly, and then I regretted it, but I made it public and I did it. And it's actually been a lot easier to make that standing commitment to put out a podcast every week. There was a reason I skipped last week. Doesn't matter, but it's, generally I don't skip weeks anymore because I made it public. And I encourage you to consider that. Make a commitment to somebody that you are going to send them pages every other Friday, or that you are going to help them, you're both going to submit X amount of stories this month and actually stick to it. Keep a blog of all of your submissions and make that public. I have one called 101 Rejections. It's kind of fallen away now, but a few years ago I decided to do that, and I actually got 101rejections.com and started logging all my successes and failures there, and it was quite interesting to make it public. Related to that, do it more often. That's when I talked about deciding to go weekly with this podcast, it made it actually easier because you get into a groove. I know all the things I have to do to get myself going and to make the podcast better. I have to draw a mind map first, and then I have to do some vocal exercises, and then I know exactly which programs I'm using to record and edit. I know exactly where I'm putting it, and I never have to remind myself of how to do this. I do have checklists and workflows and stuff that keep me on track, but generally, because I do this every week now, it comes much more naturally. And that is also true if you're sitting down to write regularly. I'm not going to say every day, because not everybody needs to be writing every day, but you need to be sitting down to write regularly enough that you're not going from a cold standing start that lets all the insecurities in. If I didn't do this podcast for 3 weeks, I might not come back to it. Next, people are kinder and more impressed than you think they're going to be. I think, I hope that you get some inspiration from this podcast every week. I hope that I fire you up and enthuse you and get you, make you believe that you can and should be writing. But I sort of believe that, and I keep going because people have told me that in amongst this 15 minutes of Woohoo Go You that I do every week, there's one line or one nugget that really connected with them. Because I know you, right? We're the same. We're writers. We struggle with the same things. Not all of them, but so people, when you put something out into the world, people in general really want you to succeed. They want you to do something good because they get something out of it if you do. When you go to a movie, unless you're a movie critic, you're not looking to tear it down. Unless you enjoy that. You and your friends pull movies apart and that's your entertainment, fair enough. But in general, people are rooting for you to succeed. And that is, true for podcast audiences. It's true for readers of your stories. It's true for editors and agents. They are looking to find great writing. So don't be afraid to put it out there. People are also, they're kinder than you think. They will look for the good in what you're doing and they'll let you know about it. So don't be afraid to put your best work out there. As long as you are doing your best, you're not treating your audience with disdain, you're not just dashing off some nonsense and asking everyone to love it. You're remembering that no one owes you time or compliments or eyeballs or eardrums or whatever you're producing. You're respecting your audience and you're being true to what you want to say. Remember that you might be just what they need. So be bold, don't worry overly about what people are going to think about your work, because in general, people are kind, they want to be entertained, they want you to do a good job, so go for it. I'm also going to suggest that you make friends. One of the things I've learned from all of my work here at Story a Day, as well as this podcast, is that we're in this together. And so if anyone ever responds to you in any way about your work, get back to them and say thank you and like start a conversation. We are social animals. We rise together. We want to hang out with the people that we know, like, and trust. So if anybody responds to your creative art, respond to them on a human level. They will encourage you to continue. Making that human connection with somebody almost immediately turns them into a fan. And we do our work for ourselves, but we also do it for an audience. And when you make that connection with someone and they become a fan, it's very encouraging. It's also on a deeper level, if you actually become friends with people in the writing community or in your creative community, you will start to hold each other accountable. You'll start to encourage each other. We're very, very hard on ourselves. We're very critical of our own work, and other people see it without all the emotional baggage, and they will see things in your work that you don't see. They'll encourage you. And we need that, not to be needy, but we do need people to give us a healing slap, as a friend of mine calls it. And when you have fans and friends and a community of creatives around you, you have this sort of tribe of boosters. Everybody wants to feel like they're part of the in crowd. So any little success you have, people who know you and who are fans of yours or friends of yours, I think it's the same thing, they share that burden, both of the good days and bad days. Like if you're struggling, they'll give you words of encouragement. If you have a success, they will celebrate it. If you release something into the world, the people who know you are going to be the ones who retweet it and repost and say, hey, look what my friend did, or hey, look what my favorite writer did, or hey, these people are going to lift you up. So make friends in the creative world that you inhabit. It's a very flat structure in the creative world. You can be a huge fan of a writer, and when you meet them and when you release your first thing, you'll find out that they're a fan of yours too. There's not much of a hierarchy in writing or any creative world, really. On a basic human creative level, there are some egos when things get big and expensive and professional, maybe, but actually, at either end of the scale, when people are insecure and starting out, and when people are like slightly successful, I think that's where the egos get shaky. When you're just doing the work, there's not really an awful lot of ego between creative people. So the final thing I want to say that I've learned from doing 200 episodes of this podcast, which really started just for me to keep myself accountable, to share what I was learning and to make sure that I was learning something about writing often enough to put out a podcast episode. I have learned that your voice matters, that sharing what you know and what you believe builds connections with other people. I'm immensely grateful to everybody who listens to this podcast, who downloads this podcast, who gets back to me and says, you said a thing and it was just what I needed to hear. Thank you for listening. And in case you haven't been here for all 200 episodes, I'm putting together a sort of table of contents, a downloadable table of contents thingy that you can get. So if you come over to storyaday.org/podcast list, drop your email address in there and I will send you a copy of the Story a Day podcast list. It's grouped into interviews that I've done with people like Jane Friedman and Angela Ackerman and Primi Mohammed and all kinds of great writers and writing teachers. I've also got episodes that are just sort of, rah-rah encouragement. I've got episodes that are writing prompts and episodes where I talk about how to do a particular thing, sort of more craft-based. So I'm putting together that list, and if you come over and pop your email into that box at storyaday.org/podcast list, I will get that to you as soon as possible. Thank you again for being a listener. Thank you for being a creative person. Go have a wonderful creative week, and I'll see you back here next week. If you want to learn to write, don't read another book or article. Start writing. I'm here to invite you to consider the Story a Day 3-Day Challenge. It's a challenge and a workshop that gets people writing and completing stories in just 3 days. And it works. I'm fanatical about getting more and more diverse stories into the world, and I think yours should be among them. If you're feeling the pull to write or level up your storytelling, let me hold your hand through 3 days of short story writing. Check out the 3-Day Challenge at storyaday.org/3DC. All right, before I leave you for this week, I lied, I'm coming back. I want to give you a link to a writing prompt that will get you going and put into place. Now that I've got you all fired up, it'll give you a way to put some of these things into practice. One of them is lowering the bar with a ridiculous prompt. Another one is giving you, some examples to follow. I would love it if you would post I'm going to give you a link to a writing prompt from a few years ago that I actually recorded a pep talk for beforehand. So I'm going to send you over there. I want you to listen to the pep talk, think about writing a story as a list. It's one of my favorite assignments to give people because it sort of turns your brain inside out. Like, how do you tell a story in a list? There's an example you can look at there. You can listen to me blather on about how to do it. But what I would also like you to do, if you take up this challenge, is to comment on that post and say, yes, I wrote a story, or yes, I attempted a list story, and tell us how it felt. And then, in the interests of building your community, comment on somebody else's comment. Putting all this out there, engaging, which is my theme for this month at Story a Day. All of these things are wonderful things, and we don't always remember to do them. So check the show notes for the link to that writing prompt. And I will see you next week. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week. And of course, keep writing.